it occurs to me that it would be smart to actually show you what you need to make these pine needle basket items. First of all, before I do that, I want to show you, this is just kind of a sample of something I've been working on. It'll be like a mat, you know, to put, well, you don't want to put anything really hot on this, but, you know, like on the table for serving pieces, or you can put a plant on it, or, you know, a really, really big coffee mug, whatever. So this kind of gives you an idea of what it looks like. Now, my work, at least on the stuff I'm going to show you, isn't real artistic. I'm not working on, you know, special stitches or making special patterns. This is more kind of utilitarian, but it still kind of has a sort of a funky hippie vibe. I like it, even though it's not perfect. So that's what that is. Now, what you're going to need is your prepared pine needles, but what you're going to sew them with is raffia. This is a big, huge box of raffia that I got at a thrift store when I was with Abigail. I just pulled out one chunk of it. This stuff has it feels kind of waxy. It's the raffia it's been prepared somehow. So it's stronger, it's not brittle. So when you go to buy raffia, feel it and make sure it's the kind that's kind of waxy and strong. And this is about the size of a strand that you would use to sew with. You need a tapestry needle. It needs to have a nice sharp point, not a blunted point. This is a nice sharp point. Oh, well, that's not going to work. I don't have automatic. I'm not using the back camera. Anyhow, and a nice big eye. Well, a nice big eye that you can stick it through easily. Have yourself a little pair of pliers, because sometimes you're going to need to pull the needle through. It can often get real, you know, it's tight, it can get kind of gummy, so you'll need to sometimes pull the needle through. So have a little pair of pliers. You need to have a pair of scissors. This used to be scissors. This became a Mallory chew toy, but I'm using them anyway. So scissors. And yeah, that's about it. And of course your prepared pine needles. So, having given you your materials list, now let's move on. So I have a bunch of soaked prepared pine needles. I have my raffia, my tapestry needle that still has some junk in it from the last time. I have a pair of pliers, because sometimes pulling the raffia through can be difficult, and I have my piece of jacked up scissors here that Mallory chewed the side off, but they're wonderful scissors. They're titanium coated stainless steel scissors. I mean, screw that. I can still figure out a way to work those things. So, my fault. Should have put them away. So anyhow, I am ready to get going. So, I go ahead and I thread my needle. I like to thread from the piece that was attached to the plant itself. It's a kind of thicker and a little bit stronger, so I like to use that as my lead edge. And then here at the very end of it, this is the part that I'm going to use to wrap and tie. So what I do is I take 3 of the pine needle bundles, and you can see these have been prepared. They've had their little ends scraped off, which is easy to do when they're wet. Those rough ends, you just kind of scrape them off with your fingernail. So I put them together like so, and actually I'm going to do 4. And as you're moving around this thing, you can use, if you find some that are broken, I like these. I mean, you can still use them, but I like to try to start my, well, that hasn't been peeled off. I like to start my rounds with ones that are in pretty good shape, because you need to be doing some real tight coiling. So anyhow, first thing I do is I wrap. I start about I don't know, 3/4 of an inch or as much as an inch down. I'm going to wrap all the way to this end, then I'm going to wrap back. I'm going to bend this and take a stitch. So that's what this looks like. And I don't even really need to tie this. I just need to wrap it a couple times. So I just wrap. You don't have to cover every little bit. It's no big deal. To get to the end, so now I'm going to wrap back. Okay. Alrighty. So, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bend this into a C shape, and I'm going to take a stitch from the top of the C to the bottom. So, this is what that looks like. You bend this over into like a backward C shape. Then you are going to pass the needle through here and into here. So that looks like this. And that is, I'm going to actually turn it over to push it up into there. That is kind of hard to do, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the end of my needle down onto this this glass plate I've got, and that'll push the needle up. And then I'm going to take and use my plier and pull the needle through. Okay. Then I am going to finish up the stitch. And turn it back over. And you can see what that looks like. The stitch has gone through here, the top of here, and come out through the bottom there. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to put this into working position. Working position is with the lead pine needles coming off on the left side. You're going to be they're going to be going coiling counterclockwise. So this part is inexact. I mean, you're not going to get the stitches, at least I can't get my stitches looking real pretty. My goal is to start getting this thing coiled and stitched down. So what I'll do is I'll coil a bit of it around, maybe I get about half of it coiled, and I hold it tight, and I just start going through that center and taking stitches and working my way around the pine needles. I don't trip too hard about making sure that they're all covered or anything. My goal here is just to get the coil started. And that can be a bit of a challenge because the pine needles are not going to want to bend nicely, and you're going to have to hold them tightly in your left hand, kind of pinch the whole thing together, then push real hard to get this through. This is the hard part. But you need to persevere, and you need to just coil a little bit. Take another stitch through the center. You're just stitching through the center at this point. That's going to change here pretty quick, but we get the first few rounds of coiling taken care of. Then we'll start stitching in a different spot. So coil a bit more. Take another stitch through the center. It helps too if when you're making your stitches, you kind of pull the raffia around and hold it before pulling it through, and that helps you to lay the raffia down neatly without having it get all weird as you pull it through. So another little bit more, so I'm going to push this through the center, then I'll take and I'll lay this raffia down and hold it so that it doesn't move around as I pull the stitch through. You're going to get weird things like this. Don't worry about it. This can all be clipped off later. Coil a little bit further. Go down through the center. Lay my raffia down. Pull it through. Coil a little bit further around. Go through the center. At this point you can see that we're beginning to lay a layer on top of the first coil. The first coil ended about here, and now we're starting a second story, so to speak, of coil. And we've still got quite a bit of pine needle off the end. We're not going to worry about adding pine needles yet. We just want to keep turning those needles and stitching through the center. Turning and stitching. And we're going to go a bit more. Turn and stitch. And I think I'm going to take one more stitch before I start adding pine needles. Oh, something else you need to be wary of. See, I managed to not catch these in the last stitch. You have to, when you're first beginning your coil, you really have to be aware, like I'm going to stick this through here, you really have to be aware of catching all of the needles, because they're going to have this tendency to want to go down, you know, on the other side of that center section, and then you would not catch them. Okay, so that is pretty good. We are at a pretty good position there where we can start adding needles. And this is how we do that. When you're ready to add your first needle, you've made a stitch, right? So now, this is how you add a needle. You pick up your one section of pine needles. You're going to place it down so that it's roughly in the center of the coil, and you're going to place it right on top of the previous stitch, right on top of it. You're going to kind of hold it. You're going to take a stitch, but instead of going through the center, you're going to go through the center of that first coil. So right about there is a good spot. What I like to do is I like to wrap this around so that it's already wrapped around the needle nicely, and I'm holding it with my thumb, and then, oops, and then pull it through. So you have your first needle attached. Now you're going to take what I call a traveling stitch, because you have to advance around the coil. So you take a stitch, oh, I don't know, so that it's about 1/4 of an inch further along. So you've traveled a little bit around. Here's the end of your first pine needle. You've taken a stitch over here. Now you're going to take another stitch in the same hole that you just went in. You're going to take your next set of pine needles. You're going to put it on top of that first stitch, that stitch that you just made, kind of in the center, like that. You are going to go through the same hole that you just made, and like I said, I like to wrap this around and hold it. Use pliers if you have to, because when you're first starting this, it takes a lot of strength. So I'm going to hold this down, pull it through. Alright, there you go. Now you're going to continue to coil around, and you're going to take another stitch, another traveling stitch. So you're going to come around, take your stitch to the center, wrap that down. Okay, so you've advanced. Now you're going to add another pine needle. You're going to put it on the top, covering up that stitch you just made. You're going to hold it real tight in your left hand. You're going to go through the same hole from the stitch that you just made. I like to wrap this around and hold it because it's in place. Then you're going to pull your needle through, and there you go. You can see how that's beginning to form a pattern. Now you take another stitch, and you're not tripping about where these stitches are so much as you just want to continue to advance around. So don't worry about where you place the stitch at this point. That will become an issue later, but right now it's not. So I'm taking my next traveling stitch. Now I'm going to place my next set of pine needles and through the same hole. make sure I catch my pine needle end, like that one's a little bit. You can push them forward a little bit too if you start. I gotta advance my string. Okay. If it looks like it's gonna fall out because you didn't push it so far, just push it up in there a little bit. So, coil a little bit further. Hold your coil. Take a traveling stitch through the center of the coil underneath. Wrap that. Pull it through. Now you're ready to add another set of pine needles. On top of the traveling stitch, wrap it, go through the same hole as the traveling stitch hole, and like that one's a little funky, so I push it through a little bit. So you're trying to, you can see how you just want a little bit hanging out at the end. You don't want a whole bunch, and you don't want just the tip. So, holding your coil, you're going to take another traveling stitch through the center of the coil underneath it. Bring that around. Traveling stitch completed. And we're going to add another set of pine needles. Now sometimes what will happen when you're starting this and adding these pine needles so frequently down at the small coil base, your hank of pine needles is going to get a little too thick. And this one is feeling like it's a little bit too thick. I don't know how many there are there. I don't know, 15 or so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep taking a traveling stitch and then a pine needle stitch. I'm just not going to put the pine needle in there because I need to get a little bit further around before I start adding more pine needles. And this is about the only time you ever have to not add pine needles, is when you're doing this beginning round and this is just getting too thick. So let's just go ahead and do that. So this was a traveling stitch, so I'll go through it again. I'm just not adding a pine needle. And I think I'm going to do it again. I'm going to take this traveling stitch. And another stitch through there. And another one. Okay, now you'll notice that I've gotten so far around now that I'm starting to coil above where I've put pine needles. Well, all I do is I make sure that the ends of the pine needles are not up underneath here. I make sure they've pulled forward so that they're at the top. I just simply lay this thing above it, and then you can take a stitch either beside or above or behind the pine needle bundle, but you don't want to go through it. So I'm going to go right above it. And the only reason you don't want to go through it is because it's just very hard to pull it through. So, and by through it, I mean you don't want to go take your stitch through that. You want to be above that thing or below it. And I just happen to go above it. So that was my traveling stitch. And this would have been the one that held down a pine needle. And I'm going to do another one. And what you're going to start seeing, you're going to start seeing these little V shapes because your traveling stitch is here. And then you come around with your pine needle stitch, which makes a V. So you can see how you've got those started. What you're going to be doing eventually is you're going to be taking stitches and adding pine needles right in between these V's. So we're kind of creating, well, like here's one from underneath that we're going to go ahead and use. I'm going to go ahead and go through the center of the V on my traveling stitch. All hung up somehow. Okay. Oh, come on, come on. So there's my traveling stitch. Then I'm going to go through the traveling stitch hole, which is in the center of the V, like so. These things get kind of weird and caught up in themselves. You kind of have to Kind of have to sometimes sort of shake these out so they don't knot themselves up. And the next V is over here, but that's too far away, so I'm going to start another traveling stitch between those two. So I'll go here. Oops. And then come around for my... So now this is thinned out a little bit, so I can start adding pine needles, and I'm going to start adding them in, but I'm going to add them in the center of each V. I'm going to make a stitch all the way around, so that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches. But because we need to increase, if all I did was just use the 7 stitches, the stitches would be like this far apart eventually. So about every second or third round, you start doing new V stitches in between the ones that you have. So let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to go through this one here that's existing. And well, you know, before we go any further with that, I need to show you how to add new raffia. So I'm not going to put a pine needle here. I'm just going to make the second stitch in this hole, and then we're going to finish this off and start after this when I get the new raffia in. So there we go. So now we're ready to add new raffia because I'm down to the end. So the way I do that is I just turn the thing over, and I just run my needle up kind of through and behind the work that I just did to the back of it, sort of, and behind. So I've got it sticking out there, and then I take my jacked up Mallory scissors and I trim that off flush. That's all you got to do. You don't need to tie it or anything. Now we're going to do a new, put on a new string of raffia. So obviously I take out that section, and I need to reach over here and get myself a new one. This is a nice thick one. I like these thick ones. In fact, this one is so thick I can turn it into 2. So you can see how it's kind of naturally splitting anyway. So I'll just split that all the way. So now I've got 2. And that's not too thin. That's about as thin as you'd want to do it, but that's not too thin. So let me go ahead and get that. Threaded. Okay. Now, oh, you know what? That was the delicate end, so I have to bring it all the way up because this is the stronger end. Normally I would have threaded from this end. So anyhow, so now what I do, in order to make this, to connect it, what I do is I come down through a V-stitch, the next V-stitch that I would be coming through, and I'm going to go underneath the needle at this one because it's just a better spot. Bring it through like so. Now all I do is make a knot. I tie this to the end. So that's easy enough. And you probably don't even need to make a knot. This is just the way I do it. Tie it, make a double knot. Now I'm ready to continue. So I put myself back into working position. This thing just can hang off in here. It's going to be all woven in anyway. So I took a stitch into this V, so I'm going to go ahead and add, I'm going to pretend like that was a traveling stitch. I'm going to go ahead and add a pine needle at this point. So I just put it down on the surface there, go through my original stitch, and there we go. Oops, there we go. So Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a stitch in between each of these V's now. So here we go. I'm going to take a traveling stitch here. I'm going to pull this around, kind of hold it into place while I pull it through. And I'm going to add some pine needles. I'm going to take my pine needle stitch, like so. I'm going to take a traveling stitch, which is going to be in the center of this V, which just happens to be the center of the coil beneath the top coil. So there we go. Now I'm going to add my set of pine needles. And I'm going to bring this, going to go through here first, and I'm going to bring this and hold it so it'll hold the thing down. And there you go. Now I'm going to coil a little bit more. I'm going to go through the center between these two V stitches. I'm going to go into the center of the coil underneath. Wrap this thing around. This is my traveling stitch. And I'm going to add some pine needles. And you can see how this is beginning to have its characteristic pattern here. Go through the next V stitch. It's my traveling stitch. And I'm going to add some more pine needles. Go through same hole with the traveling stitch, bring this around. Now I'm going to make another stitch between the two. And the pine needles are getting a little bit thick again, so I'm going to take a few stitches without adding pine needles at this point. I'm still going to go in the V stitch and between the V stitches until I get around to this point where I started doing that. So that's going to keep going because I'm trying to set up my spacing for the next coil that goes around. And this just feels like it's too thick. And you kind of make this decision as you work it as to whether you're going to actually add a set of pine needles at that point or not. Because you can tell just kind of by feeling. And also by, obviously looking, you can see how thick this is here. It thins out. So when I get around over here, I'm going to start adding more. But I'm going to go ahead and make my traveling stitch in between the two there. And like I said, it really helps if you hold this thing down before you pull it through, because that way it's already laid into position nicely. You can make your hole and then pull this around and hold it with your thumb while you pull this down. And then here's a V stitch I can go into and take another stitch there. Sometimes the V isn't very well defined, but you'll know where it is as you go around. You'll be able to tell. And here's the center of a V stitch, or rather between two V stitches. Sometimes it gets hung up when you pull it around. Just try to pull it into position. There you go. And now you're going to take your second stitch through the V stitch there, or the traveling stitch rather. And here you've got your next V stitch. So you'll take your traveling stitch there in between it and come through. I'm going to wrap this around and hold it. And now it's getting, oops, got hung up. Okay, Okay, so now we're getting to the point where you can even like manipulate these V's a little bit better if you want to. So now I'm just about, I think I'm going to take one more stitch in between the two V stitches, set up one more stitch with the travel and a pine needle stitch. Shake that out. Okay. So now I think I'm ready to start adding pine needles again. I think that's about, we're about at that point. So I'm just going to let you take a, well, you know what, I take that back. If I take two more stitches, one here and one here, then I'm going to be back to the beginning. So let's do that just for continuity's sake. We're going to go make our traveling stitch through the V. Take a pine needle stitch through there, not adding the pine needle obviously. And I need to get myself a little more lead. There we go. Now, in between this set of V stitch and this V stitch, I'm going to put my last stitch that's going to be in between the two, at least for a while. And that will bring me all the way around to the beginning of the next row. You can kind of see where it started here and here. Alrighty, so now I'm ready to start adding pine needles again. You don't have to be anal and make the stitch into a V. Sorry, I keep taking myself out of frame. I'm doing that because I'm watching this and I'm not looking through the viewfinder, so pardon me about that. So anyway, now I'm ready to start adding pine needles again. So you can see that I've set up, let's see here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, about 14 V stitches around here. So now instead of going in between them, I'm just going to go right through the V stitches as I work my way around. So I am ready to, and the first V stitch happens to be this one that I'm calling this one that I tied it to right here as being my first stitch of the 14. And 14 just happens to be, yours might be 16 or 15 or it could be anything, but once you get around to this point, now you're going to start just going through the V stitches, not making additional ones between them. So here we go. I'm going to take a traveling stitch into the center of the coil underneath. And I'm doing it right above this first stitch. Now, I'm going to lay down my pine needle. I'm going to go through the same hole. Kind of hold this down. Whoops, sorry about that. There we go. All right. So now I take another traveling stitch. I'm going to go to the center of the next V stitch. I'm going to go through it. And I'm going to hold this down while I pull it through. Now I'm going to lay a set of pine needles in there on top of that traveling stitch. I'm going to go through here. And pull it through. Give myself a little more lead on this raffia, which is beginning to get really screwed up. It does. It gets really funky by the end. You just kind of have to be just a little careful with it. So now I'm ready to go into the next set of V's right here with a traveling stitch. And now I'm going to lay down another set of pine needles and make my pine needle stitch. And here's the next V. Go through it. with the traveling stitch, lay down a set of pine needles. Hold that down. Lay down a little bit more. Here's my next V-stitch. Go through it with the traveling stitch. And I'm going to lay down another set of pine needles. And at this point, now you are just going to keep going and going and going. After you've coiled this around probably another time, you're going to notice that your stitches are going to be getting further and further apart, these V stitches. So that's when you're going to start adding a V stitch in between the existing V stitches, because it's going to be stretching out like that. So that, in a nutshell, is how you do this. Another set right here. So that gives you a place to start. Now, when your piece gets to the size you want it to be, let's say I'm done. Let's say this is the size I want this. All you do is you continue wrapping your raffia and making the stitches into the V stitch and then a traveling stitch, just as if you were placing pine needles, but you're not. You're just continuing to sew this down, 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 down till you get, you know, towards the end or at the end. And then you just make that back stitch again where you push the, just like you're tying off an end of this to start another one, do the same thing. You just push it through, bring it up through here somewhere, pull it tight, clip it off, and you're done. So then you're going to have a kind of a damp piece, you know, because you're working with wet pine needles. You're going to want this to dry out quickly, but not in like full blazing sun. So you might want to set it outside on your porch where it gets some indirect light. It needs to be in a dry place. If you fired up your kitchen to make, you know, cook all day or whatever, you might want to set it, you know, next to your next to your stove or in the window, something like that, because you'd want this to dry out fairly quickly, because if it takes too long to dry out, it'll smell funky. But it should dry out pretty well within 2 or 3 days and be, oh heck, oh, that smells wonderful. Oh, I don't know why, but it reminds me of baseball. I have no idea why. It reminds me of baseball, community baseball games in the summer. Sitting in the grass, watching your dad play Twilight League ball. It's good. Anyhow, so that's how you finish it, and that's how you dry it. Next up in the series will be some extended construction videos. In other words, I'll show you how to make a curved basket. I'll show you how to make a basket with straight sides and a lid that you put on the top. I'm going to show you how to do some surface ornamentation with beads. You know, kind of that sort of thing. So that's all upcoming. But this will give you a place to start. Now, if you have questions about the construction or anything I somehow didn't show you how to do very well, please leave questions in the comments, and I will try to get to that as quickly as possible. I may be making some like little explanatory videos if there's something that needs to be shown better. Oh my gosh, a mosquito already. So anyhow, I hope you guys have fun with that. I get addicted to this. I could sit and do pine needle baskets all day until my hands get all tired. So I love it. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.